And we'll wait a little bit here, see some folks are able to join us. We got one person watching right now. Rather than just jumping right into Exodus chapter 2, since the last two Wednesday nights we haven't been able to physically gather, I thought we'd start out, throw the floor open to the folks here, and if you're online and you want to bring up a comment now about Exodus chapter 1, which we've looked at the last 2 weeks. So anything jump out at you about that first chapter of Exodus? Maybe new thoughts, or maybe an old one that I didn't touch on you want to talk about, something like that? Hi, Sherry. Hi, Robin. Okay, I guess not. So we got a couple of folks watching, almost 2 minutes in. So let's start with Exodus chapter 2. And we'll look at verses 1 through 10. Bear with me a little bit on my reading. I went to the eye doctor today, and my eyes have still not recovered from it. So the only doctor you go to and you feel worse when you come out. Exodus 2, beginning verse 1. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got him a wicker basket and covered it over with tar and pitch. Then she put the child into it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile with her maidens walking alongside the Nile. And she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid and brought it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying. And she had pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go ahead." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. The child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses, and said, "Because I drew him out of the water." Okay, what do we think about that passage right there?
God takes care of his people. She got paid for raising her own child.
Good job if you didn't get it.
What would happen if we did that today? I don't know. We've got so many other things to spend money on, I guess we couldn't do that.
That would be heartbreaking when we have to give a child. After you leave it.
Okay. Well, it's an interesting story. It's very good. Hi, Nell. It's a very well written and well thought out story. It's one that I guess, not to say, I'm not at all suggesting it didn't actually happen, and this is not the way it happened, but as a story, it shows so much of what God is doing. As PD said, God takes care of his people, but the means that he employs are so unlikely. They're so different than humans would probably come up with on their own. It would be hard to give your child back after you had weaned it, give it to the Pharaoh's daughter. at the same time, you know, he's going to live a life of privilege and comfort. He won't be out there being oppressed like the rest of the Hebrew children would. And he was given back to you. You know, you gave him away in a sense because you felt like you had to, and that's the story. She can't hide him any longer. She can't keep him, so she puts him in a basket and puts him in the river. And then she draws him up back from the river as Pharaoh's daughter draws him up, and that's the name, the play on the name of Moses is kind of this idea of going into and coming up out of the Nile River. I don't know how y'all feel about crocodiles and alligators. We don't have a lot of them around here outside of the zoos, I don't think. I don't think the crocodiles would have liked the last couple of weeks too much. They do get, the alligators in Florida they get a cold snap every now and then down there in the Everglades, and they're able to take it. Sometimes other species of crocodilian get introduced illegally into the Everglades down there in Florida. Somebody will have them as pets or whatever, and they'll have a caiman or a Nile crocodile or a saltwater crocodile or something like that, and figure out they can't really take care of it anymore, and they'll just turn it loose in the swamps of Florida. Thank you very much for that. But those other crocodiles usually have a really hard time when it is a kind of a cold winter by Florida standards. But the American alligator that we have, which is our real, I guess there is a different kind of crocodile in swamps, but really the one we have is the American alligator. And it, every now and then it gets somebody. Every now and then it will attack a human being. Not very often. They're pretty, as crocodilians go, pretty placid, pretty human averse. They generally try to stay away from us. There's some really funny YouTube videos. I don't know if I shared it with Tammy. I think I should share you guys. Maybe I didn't send it to Tammy because of the language in it, but he's in one of those little canoes where you paddle, and he's fishing in the swamps down there in either Florida or Georgia or Louisiana or somewhere in there. And he gets a big bite. He's reeling, and a big old alligator comes up right next to his, and he just drops that pole and starts paddling like that's probably a couple $100 fishing pole, but he's, you know, he don't want what's on the other end of it at that particular time. They are, but like I said, they're not real aggressive towards humans. Nile crocodiles kill more people every year than probably every other crocodile type around the world, except maybe the saltwater crocodile, and it has a really huge expanse. It goes all over the place. The Nile crocodile is found in different places in Africa too, not just on the Nile. But they are very aggressive towards humans. And notice Pharaoh's daughter sent a slave to go get the basket out of the reeds. And maybe in their practice, her female slave women would have been kind of, she goes down in the river, but they're surrounding her in the river. So the crocodile would have attacked one of them before, maybe not at all, Pharaoh's daughter, kind of a human shield. They build in certain places in Africa, they'll build kind of gator or crocodile proof little fences where they can get in and out of the water. I don't know how effective they are against a really determined crocodile, but that was, it's an interesting story. She is really putting him in a very precarious situation, but she is not ending his life. You know, that's the thing. She is giving him a chance and kind of, in a sense, entrusting him to God by the means of putting him in the basket and putting him in the river. That is a way of leaving it, in a sense, to God. And perhaps an unlikely outcome that the baby would be restored to her, but that's the point, is that God can bring about the most unlikely of things. And really the point, it picks up and it kind of carries with the end, the second half really of chapter 1, which is these women, the midwives, pulling the wool over Pharaoh's eyes. They are able to deceive the most powerful man in the world because, like a lot of men that are very foolish, they try to go into things that are really supposed to be women only. You may be a real powerful man. You may be able to do all this stuff out there in the world, but this womanly stuff, most of us guys wisely stay completely out of it. And the guys who are foolish enough to get into it soon regret it, and maybe, hopefully, never make that mistake again. But he goes in and he tries to get the midwives to kill the baby boys. But that is really a woman's world there. That's an area of life that even the most powerful man in the world, has a hard time penetrating, has a hard time having a real force, real power in that setting. Men, for the most part, we want to stay away from that sort of thing. I know it's been quite a while now, the trend towards having the father in the delivery room with the mother. I'm all against that. I don't think that should happen, but it doesn't affect me, so that's fine. I would rather be out in the waiting room and pacing around smoking cigarettes nervously, something like that, But that's not how they do it anymore. That's how they did it on the old TV shows, and that always looked good to me. There'd be Ricky Ricardo out in the waiting room smoking while Lucy's in there all by herself. And then you go in and her hair is perfect and everything's wonderful, It looks like nothing really happened. But there's a baby now. Perfectly clean and, sleeping, wonderful little baby right there. So that sounds like a good way to become a father to me. I don't know. Now, man, we got to be in there. We got to bring the video camera too, I guess, and all that. So, but that's a whole different kettle of fish there. But it's men trying to go into what was an exclusively a female realm, and even Pharaoh cannot really effectively introduce himself into that situation. Yes, ma'am.
There's one interesting thought is that Pharaoh said to every son cast into the Nile.
Yes.
So she did follow the law of the land.
Yeah.
Even though she made an ark for him so that he wouldn't sink, she did put him in the river.
That's a really neat part of the story that she's not supposed to wait 3 months to do it, but she did it. And what went into the Nile, sometimes what you throw into the Nile comes back out. And it's not what you want to come back out. And ultimately, Moses, this is bad news for Egypt, because this is the man who will lead God's people, lead the Hebrews up out of Egypt. But the way God creates the story, the narrative is brought to us. We see that he uses Pharaoh's own words against him. And it's a different Pharaoh, but that's kind of how God works through the plagues, really, is, Pharaoh's heart is hardened over and over again. And it's not, I don't think, unreasonable to wonder why would a loving God, you say he's love, why would he harden somebody's heart? And there's some, I guess, argumentation, various of kinds in that, but I think the way God hardens Pharaoh's heart is key, in that he hardens Pharaoh's heart by giving him opportunities to obey him. All Pharaoh has to do is obey God, and it all stops. But God knows Pharaoh will not obey him. And this Pharaoh makes a commandment, gets it complied with, and then will live, not him personally, but the empire will soon regret what comes back up out of the Nile. And of course, he doesn't. It's kind of a little bit start and stop. It's a Hebrew baby amongst Hebrews. He goes into the river, discovered by Egypt, but restored to the Hebrew nation for a time, and then inserted directly into the house of Pharaoh. So he is a Hebrew living right there in the house, the grandson of Pharaoh, effectively. And it's this child that will ultimately liberate with God's power. He will be the vessel by which God liberates his people. So it's this really subversive way of dealing with the greatest power. Instead of initially taking Pharaoh on strength against strength, God does what Paul says God does. He uses the weak to defeat the strong. He uses the slave women, the slave midwives, this mother of a Hebrew child. He uses Pharaoh's daughter, who will not have the standing. He would have much better standing than a Hebrew woman in that empire, but not the full standing. She's not going to be Pharaoh. She disobeys, disregards, subverts her father's commandment. God does not take on Pharaoh one man against another, mano y mano. He takes on Pharaoh mano y womano, I guess you could say, man versus woman. He uses weakness in the eyes of humans to defeat the strongest man in the world. And again, this is just so like God, and this is so womanly. This is just at their time, their prerogative, their whole reality is in childbirth, and even the midwives. And I talked about this a little bit online. The women of Genesis are not portrayed very favorably overall, I don't think. And some of you may disagree, but I don't think they come out looking very good very often. Tamar is kind of the exception, and Tamar holds herself out as a prostitute, right? And she becomes the one that's declared to be righteous amongst the women of Genesis. All of the other women are really limited in their roles. They are wives and mothers. And I am not at all trying to dishonor or critique the stay-at-home moms at all. My mother was, for most of our upbringing, a stay-at-home mom. I think the world of that. I know it's not an easy job. But when women are given absolutely no honor outside of the home, they don't have a place outside of the home in society, then they really find themselves in a situation where they have to be very manipulative to kind of get what they want, to get maybe what they need. And looking at it from a distance, it doesn't look very good. It's not very appealing. Here, there is still a lot of manipulation going on, a lot of kind of deceit going on. Miriam is following along. Maybe she wants to see the crocodile eat her baby brother who's been keeping her up at night crying or whatever. I know you wouldn't think a big sister would ever do that, but maybe sometimes they do. I don't know. But God uses not just Moses' mother, not just Pharaoh's daughter, but uses Miriam, uses a little Hebrew slave girl to bring about his will. So he is just continually in the story, continually taking Moses and putting him in a place where he is completely safe from the most powerful man in the world, and he's doing it by just enclosing women around him. Pharaoh can't touch him when he's surrounded by all these women. And so it's a really powerful and a very effective story. And it's a story that I think, between the two of them especially, kind of represents the high point of femininity, if you will, in the Old Testament. There's the story of Esther. It's also a very high point. We love the story of Ruth. Again, in Ruth, there's some manipulation and things going on there. Esther is maybe more straight ahead, just courage. But this is a story that shows, especially coming out of Genesis, where the women lie to their husbands, laugh at God, lie to their fathers. Rachel lies to her father about the stolen household idol. All of these negative things the women do. Again, maybe those things are negative to us because we value honesty the way we define it. And maybe they would not have looked at it that way. I think we thought it was funny, or they would have thought how smart of these women to do this. But these women also are kind of involved in deceit. Even Miriam. I'll go get a Hebrew woman who happens to be nursing to come take care of the child. She gets the child's mother. Not just a random Hebrew woman, but Moses' actual mother. So again, as it was pointed out, she's getting paid to do what she would have done happily and out of normal course, she would have done for free. Now, Pharaoh is enriching them with it. And we see that ultimately in the Exodus. They don't just leave Egypt, they plunder Egypt on the way out. God uses the plagues to enrich the Hebrew nation as they leave Egypt. So there's a lot of foreshadowing here. Neat story being told, and just a really wonderful, I think, shift of gears or palate cleanser in terms of how women are presented here. So effective against the powers of their culture that tries to absolutely remove all power from them. And that's how God works. He uses the weak to defeat the strong. Okay. Any other thoughts on verses 1 through 10 before we move on? Verses 11 through 15. Now it came about.
I'm sorry, just one comment is we jumped a lot of time passes between 10 and 11.
Well, 10, the child grew and grew up. And, that's accurate. 11 isn't the next day. When Moses had grown up. So let's go ahead and read it. Now it came about in those days when Moses had grown up that he went out to his brethren and looked on their hard labors. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that, and when he saw there was no one around, he struck down the Egyptian and hit him in the sand. He went out the next day, and behold, 2 Hebrews were fighting each other. And he said to the offender, "Why are you striking your companion?" But he said, "Who made you a prince or judge over us? And are you intending to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and said, "Surely the matter has become known." Okay, I guess one more. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Okay. What do y'all think?
Well, and somewhere else in our studies, it was mentioned that Moses was murdered, and I knew he had killed somebody, but I didn't realize that he had murdered, and I had to go back and reread the story here, and he just flat out murdered the guy.
I guess you could say it was manslaughter. He intervened, he killed somebody to protect someone else. But it's one of those things. It's like we have had all these controversial police episodes the last few years. And, to one set of eyes, it may look like an accident or justified. And to another set of eyes, it looks like murder. So it's kind of how you look at it. What's interesting here is that it's not initially the Egyptians that are outraged by what Moses did. It's the Hebrews. They don't really seem to appreciate it too much. And I think we see as this story unfolds, we see the Hebrews reluctant to receive the emancipation that God has in mind for them. And it is a difficult thing. Whenever someone's in a very difficult situation in life, when it's somebody in an abusive marriage or some other situation where one person is oppressing the other, we kind of normally think, don't you want to be out of that situation? And maybe we have a different perspective, and we may be right long term, but it may be that person, their understanding and their way of looking at it is, this is probably the best I can do right now. And change can be scary. Even in those situations, it can be very scary for people if that's all they know. If they grew up abused by their parents, perhaps, and now they're in an abusive marriage, they've never not been abused. And to go out and live a life that's free of abuse, and what that looks like and how they make their way through the world, that's not something they're really equipped to do because they've never seen it. So it can be a very frightening thing. When I was in law school, one of the young ladies and I were talking one time, and she was at the time dating a guy I went to high school with, who I always thought he was a jerk. But she had gone. I lived in Conway and went to college in Searcy. She lived in Searcy and went to college in Conway. So we probably passed each other several times during our college careers. But she was dating this guy, and he was being really mean to her, and he was really mean, or he had been. Maybe she wasn't dating him at that time, but she had dated him years earlier, maybe when she was in college. And she was such a smart, pretty girl, was going to take the world on. You could tell at that point she was going to be a good lawyer. She was really going to have a great life. And I just asked her, why did you put up with that guy? I went to high school with him. I knew he was a jerk. Why did you put up with him? And she just looked at me and said, I didn't think I could do any better. That's what she thought at the time. And the guy she ended up marrying was a great guy. I don't remember where he was from, but he was really fun, good old boy, liked to duck hunt, stuff like that. Just a good guy. And so she traded way up from that boyfriend to the guy she ultimately married. And, it was just, you ultimately can't explain it in logical terms. But there is always the fear of the unknown. There is always a fear of change. And for the Hebrews, having a Hebrew kill an Egyptian, even if he's from the house of Pharaoh, having a Hebrew kill the Egyptian, the Hebrews are probably feeling like, this isn't going to work out well for us.
Put him in a bad way.
What's that?
You put him in a bad way.
Yes. You're bringing attention to the hardships and the toil and everything in a negative light. You're making it look like we're the bad guys. Another personal story. You may not believe this. Hi, Roxy. When I was a little boy in church, I would get in trouble sometimes. I didn't like sitting through all the lengthy worship services and all that, and I'd fidget around and I'd do something. And my parents would get tired of it after a while, and every now and then I'd get yanked up by the wrist, taken out by Dad. This is almost the only time Dad ever spanked us was at church. Taken out into the parking lot and getting whipped out in the parking lot, and then come back and sit down after I stopped crying, come back and sit down in church. And of course, everybody knew it was a big church, but everybody in our little area knew what had happened. And this little old lady one time turned around after church one time to my parents and said, you shouldn't whip that boy. He's a sweet boy. And I'm like, shut up, lady. Shut up. You're not going home with us. There's this time when you just got to take it, I guess, is what you're saying. The idea of someone intervening is not always all that appealing. And, sometimes we kind of see a wrong that we think needs to be righted, and we jump right in there. And there's a time and a place for that, I guess, but there's also a time and a place to just kind of be with the oppressed person, to just kind of journey with them. And let them find their own answer. Let them find their own way, and let them know they're not experiencing it alone. If you try to hand them their liberation when they don't really want it, it can be very difficult. Ultimately, that's kind of what God does. But we see the Hebrews here reluctant, and we will see when Moses returns. they're somewhat reluctant to accept what Moses has to say. They don't like the idea of standing up to the Egyptians necessarily. And that's maybe kind of hard to understand, but I don't think it's that unusual in human experience. I just think if you look back at history, all the times something in power, some political party or human being or whatever in power that severely oppresses another people, those people, usually it's a very small percentage that really stand up and fight against it. Most of the time that oppression goes forward because it's hard. You kind of look at it, okay, I can accommodate this, I can tolerate this, I can survive this. I can be alive for my children, I can get through it.
It may not be very comfortable, but it is your comfort zone.
It's you probably knew some guys that were residents up there at the joint and that were there for a long time, finally get out and end up right back there again. And some of it may be that they're more at home in prison than they are out trying to, and maybe their prospects out on the outside aren't that great anyway. So it's, we just get kind of conditioned to accept what, if we were healthy and strong and empowered, we would never accept. But when you don't come into that situation, and when you come into a situation where this is just the reality of life, this is what life is. Even now, I mean, how many people are putting up with a lot of garbage at work because they know even if they quit and they went and got another job, they'd have to put up with garbage at the next place. Well, why would you put up with a boss that treats you like that? Well, because if they quit and go somewhere else, they have to start all over maybe at the other place. They may have a hard time getting another job. And once they get there, that boss is going to do things that they don't really like, not treat them well all the time. So suffering, oppression is really a part of the human condition. God can intervene and bring about a real change, and he can use Moses to do it. But it needs to be certainly on God's timing and in God's way. Moses acts on his own wisdom here, on his own instincts. I'm not saying what he did was wrong. And I'm not saying that God doesn't use it. Again, we saw in Genesis repeatedly, humans acting according to their own wisdom, doing things that we don't really think were the right thing to do, but God redeeming those things and bringing about his will through them. Does God want Rebekah and Jacob to defraud Isaac and Esau? I don't think he did, but he redeemed it. He used it. The redemption is not just paying off the debt. The redemption is turning it into something good. God's redeeming power is not just to negate the bill, but to actually transform it into something effective and powerful. And God uses this as well. Moses is driven by fear and danger from this comfort level, from power. Moses isn't going to rise up through the ranks of Pharaoh's house and somehow come to the throne of Egypt and liberate his people that way. He's not going to be the next Joseph in a sense. Because that's how Joseph got the Hebrews down there, was by rising through the ranks of the house of Pharaoh and getting the intrinsic power of Egypt on his side. Moses is driven from that power, and he is going to come in, again, though, with weakness in a sense, defeat in a way that shows that God is bringing about the victory. Again, it's murder, not murder. It's one human being killing another human being, and some people will call that murder, no matter what happens, and other people will look at this and say he was just protecting his relative. And
the only problem with that is it wasn't apparently defending him in case his life, because he had time to stop and look around. So it almost gets to the
Yeah, premeditated.
premeditated.
Yeah.
Because he had time to look around, make sure nobody was watching.
So I think it is fair if you want, I mean, you can, again, I think it's fair to not call him a murderer, but I think calling this a murder is a fair interpretation, among others, perhaps. But it is, I mean, was the Egyptian going to kill the Hebrew, or was he just knocking him around a little bit? You know, so that's not really all that intrinsic. The story is to show that Moses has now deeply alienated himself from Pharaoh, and Pharaoh has learned about it. And any attempt to kind of hope you can bury it in the sands of Egypt and nobody ever finds out about it. You know, what is buried in Egypt eventually turns up, doesn't it? Because everybody wants to know what's down in the ground below Egypt. You know, eventually it gets turned up. So,
Well, and he didn't only alienate the Egyptians, he evidently, alienated his fellow kinsmen,
it's a cautionary tale for anybody who wants to interpose themselves into someone else's fight.
The Hebrew people would look at it and say, oh no, hey, Pharaoh's gonna really get on that smell because one of our people killed an Egyptian. And obviously the Pharaoh was a little bit upset.
And he was mad. The way it plays out, though, Pharaoh focuses his anger on Moses rather than generally. It shows that a regular Hebrew probably never would have done it in a million years. A regular Hebrew would have stood there and watched his brother get killed maybe before he would have done anything. It has to be someone with enough power, having been raised in the house of Pharaoh, to think of himself as fully human, fully empowered to make choices, and I shouldn't have to stand here and watch my relative get killed. Again, Moses is just in this very unique position, and God makes it even more unique. Now he's a fugitive. Okay, we'll at least talk about we'll read the last several verses of the. Let's go through, I guess, 22 or so. I think I broke it down. 16 through 22, and if we have to finish up next week, and we'll do that until next week. Come back to it. Verse 16. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. When they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "Why have you come back so soon today?" So they said, "An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds. And what is more, he even drew the water for us, and we watered he drew the water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Where is he then? And why is it that you have left the man behind? Invite him to have something to eat." Moses was willing to dwell with the man, and he gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses. Then she gave birth to a son, and he named him Gershom, for he said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." I'm a stranger in a strange land. Okay. What do we think about that passage?
Well, the woman didn't have too much to say about who they were going to marry.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different.
We talked about when we went through Genesis, Abraham being with Hagar, and then also Rachel and Leah giving their slaves to their husband in a sexual way, and in our context, in our current way of looking at things, with the lack of freedom, the lack of power, we would probably, I think, without a doubt, really consider that to be rape, because these women cannot say no. That doesn't mean that those women consider themselves victims of rape. And it doesn't, certainly, guys, it certainly doesn't mean Abraham and Jacob. It certainly doesn't mean they consider themselves rapists. They thought of it as rape. There is something, when we read these stories, something that is, it's fair, I think, to critique them through modern eyes and modern sensibilities and understand them that way. But I think we also have to try to put on, to some extent, glasses that let us see things the way those people would have seen it. And what are their expectations? How did they look at it? And, is it what we want in the world? No. Is it as bad today then as it is today? Maybe, maybe not. I think we can, especially from the women's perspective, the ones who had to endure it. And I'm not saying I can imagine that, but I don't know that contemporary women can really imagine it either, especially contemporary white Western women. I'm not sure they can really put themselves in the place of the slave women at the time. And maybe Zipporah is thrilled that, she got this guy that's not like all the other yokels around that she's always seen in her whole life. He's exotic. He's a Hebrew. Ooh, he's an Egyptian. Ooh, So, that's we can't really totally imagine it. I think it's fair again to look at these behaviors through our eyes and say, this is just not the way we do things anymore. But it's also, I think, to the text, to be fair to the text, to consider what their expectations were. Maybe Zipporah is sitting around waiting for her father to marry her off, because that's all she's ever seen are daughters that are born, raised, and married off. And she's got 6 sisters. And how many really good deals is her dad going to be able to put together? He's got 7 girls. Is he going to get 7 great bridegrooms for 7 brides, or is it going to be a couple of them? So maybe she's really happy with what turns out. Zipporah she has a very interesting role in the story. A few chapters from now, we have at the end of the story in Egypt, Pharaoh came to kill Moses. When Moses is returning to Egypt, God comes to kill Moses, and Zipporah saves him. So interesting stories. There's also some indication that not everybody loved Moses' wife. That may or may not have been Zipporah, if I remember correctly. We're getting a little bit farther down the field now than I'm ready to fully discuss. But Moses may have had more than one wife. A lot of men did back then. And but the story also is similar to some of the Old Testament, the stories of Genesis, encounters at the well with marriage, hospitality, and all of that. Abraham's servant goes to the well and then meets Rebekah, and she becomes Isaac's wife. Jacob is at the well. They're not watering the sheep like they're supposed to. Accordingly, Jacob thinks he takes over the situation, and he ends up with Rachel and Leah as a result of all that. So this is kind of placing Moses in. He's a sojourner like those people were, and it's a story that harkens back to this is how our people get married. This is how our nation was born, through stories like this. And now Moses is experiencing that story, that kind of situation.
But it didn't show that he learned very much from his problem in Egypt, because he's turning around and he delivered them. I don't know what he did to run the shepherds off, but he delivered the women.
He has this, he's hardwired, I guess, to intervene in difficult situations. Maybe he knows his own story well enough to know if somebody hadn't intervened for him, he would have never lived. And he has this urge to intervene where he sees something wrong. And sometimes you need to mind your own business, I guess. But sometimes you do. I mean, so God uses it in every way. This is Moses' calling in this. And you see why God sees him and says, this is my guy. No matter how reluctant he is when God actually gets around to calling him, this guy will stand up for oppressed people. He will get involved. Maybe sometimes when he shouldn't, but even when he shouldn't, because he's my guy, I'm going to make it work. And, this is Moses' story. I'm not saying it should be everybody else's. I'm not saying you're going to right every wrong you see, fight everybody else's battles. I mean, that's, I had a teacher one time in my graduate program that was asking questions, and I think she asked me specifically about doing something like this. I just recalled my Southern upbringing, which was one of the first things you learn from a good Southern mother is mind your own business. We mind our own business where I come from. I think I said something like that. That teacher did not like that response. I can assure you that. When you've got the anointing of the Holy Spirit on you, you can butt into everybody else's business, I guess, according to her. Well, I don't feel that way. I still will help when I can or am wanted or whatever, but fools rush in where angels fear to tread sometimes, and getting into other people's problems, a lot of times you take on more than you can really handle. And Moses does it here, and it works out. So maybe my teacher's right and I'm wrong. I don't know, but that's the way I was raised. And I blame my mother, I guess. Take care of you got your own thing, Rick. You take care of your own problems. And my mother knew that I could barely take care of myself. I didn't need to be trying to take care of everybody else. So, okay, thank you for your comments, and thanks for everybody tuning in online. And we're going to call it quits. I'm going to say a closing prayer here, and we hope to see everybody.